Oh, my fuzzy hair. Well, let's let people in. All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Looks like some people are still connecting to audio, but hopefully those that are connected can hear me okay. Excellent. That's great. Thank you. So let's just wait. I know it's 11:36, but as usual, we'll wait a few more moments. Some people will trickle in. Some people I can see on my screen are still connecting to audio. Did I end up going to campus? No, actually, I did not. The reason is that the Ottawa police are still advising not to travel to the downtown core, and I have to go through the downtown core. I have to take transit, right? Like I would have to reroute myself on the LRT, and these occupants are not a big fan of wearing masks on public transit. So yeah, I decided that I would not subject myself to that, nor would I ask my other students, some of whom may be immunocompromised, for goodness sake. I'm not going to ask them to subject themselves to that. So we decided to continue online, and I think I'll do that for the next little bit. But reading response marks 1. So Liam and I are trying our best to have this done sometime over the weekend. This way. Oh, no, I'm rushing. But it's not because I feel rushed. I want Liam and I to be able to send your feedback to you, over the weekend or something, because next week is when the next critical response is due. And of course, I think it would be best if all of you are able to, read your feedback, read our comments. If you have questions, excuse me. If you have any questions, like, about how to do better next time, how to, anything really, you can ask us before you have to submit the next one. Anabale, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just on the topic of the discussions and whatnot, I know obviously people are gonna know more what they did wrong, what they did right, once we get them back. But just one thing, because a big part of it, right, is like you pick something, a person, a concept, yada yada, that we've talked about, and that's kind of the discussion, and you want us to critically engage with it. If it was one of those kind of critical engagements, kind of just like, I wouldn't say compare, like say the last 2 or 3 classes we've had, like technocracy, kind of picking one of them, like the individuals we talked about, and kind of discussing not flaws per se, but kind of just like critiquing, I guess, their ideas of technocracy. Like, is that kind of a critical engagement?
Yeah,
that you're looking perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you could critique it on its own. I mean, say you pick, I don't know, but you pick Bacon, right? You could critique Bacon on his own, or you could even compare Bacon to Saint-Simon or Comte or Veblen or whomever you wanted, right? And that's kind of called like an adjudicative approach, where you sort of decide between the two. Like, okay, so say we've got Plato and Bacon. Who's got the best technocracy, or who's truly technocratic? All right. You could argue Bacon, or you could even, if you really wanted to be provocative, you could argue that it's Plato, and maybe you could convince me. So
yeah, I guess mine was obviously I'm not going to go too much because I started the second response, but just it was less of a comparison of the two, or all the people we've talked about technocracy, and just more of saying, like, let's see, this one that someone mentioned might have not worked in these times, for instance, but now would it still, trying to explain whether or not whatever they proposed then, if that would be a actual considered like well now or whatnot would work, and then kind of
that's cool too. And you can have a lot of fun with something like that. Like imagine if you did that with Plato. Should we institute Plato's Republic now? Let's get rid of liberal democracy and have philosopher kings. You can do something like that, and it's a lot of fun.
All right, so, that sounds good. I obviously like I picked this specific individual that's not Plato, but I still think the same idea can apply to all of them that at least we've looked at. So yeah, all right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, Julian. He's in the waiting room. I got to let him in. There he comes. Okay. All right. So that's just a little housekeeping stuff sorted. So let's do the old screen share. Let's share the whole screen. The whole screen. And then slides. So what does this mean? So we're going to start. We're going to start the next chapter. We're done with technocracy for now. Although in this chapter, it would serve everyone well to keep in mind what we talked about before, not just from the textbook, right? Not just, what technocracy is, but also some considerations from our discussion, which was about technocracy as it relates to the current pandemic. Today, what we're going to be talking about is reason. Specifically, this chapter is entitled Rationality, Technological or Technical Rationality, and Reason. Now, the nature of rationality is not just a sort of perennial question in philosophy. When we ask what reason is or how we ought to use it, how we know when we're doing it correctly, this is a big area in philosophy, obviously, and it has been for thousands and thousands of years. This area is logic, right? Logic is the science or the study of proper reasoning. So how do we reason? And logic, of course, gives lots of formal systems to us on how we can reason. But, when it comes to everyday people who aren't logicians or who aren't philosophers, I mean, heck, I'm a philosopher, but I'm no logic wizard. I don't sit around with my whiteboard drawing logical calculi on the board. It's not how, I'm not judging anyone who likes to spend their time that way, but it's just not how I'm used to doing things, right? So when it comes to everyday folks, and I should mention everyday folks are obviously people who use reason and technology. They understand rationality differently. And technocrats also kind of understand rationality a little bit differently. We're going to look at how different technological thinkers have understood reason throughout the years. So this is all kind of meant to be a survey for all of that. Again, like I kind of said last time about the textbook or one of the previous times, this book is helpful because it's very descriptive, but there's not really much by way of argumentation happening, which is, it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it gives you guys a lot of things to think about, and you can do some of the argumentation in your critical responses and in your essay. So what is the role of reason? Does reason rule? American philosophers of technology. I'm on the wrong slide. Oh my goodness. Come on. I haven't had much coffee today. I got to drink more coffee. All right. So yeah, like I was saying, for somebody like a philosopher, maybe logic or math is going to be the model of rationality. For a lot of people, it's science. a lot of laypersons, I would say probably science is the main model of rationality, albeit some may understand science better or worse than others, or have different understandings of science. We've already seen how this is possible. Remember chapter 1, we saw many different understandings of science, from inductivism to positivism to Kuhn to falsificationism, right? Lots of different understandings of science. And for many people, science is the main model of rationality. And remember, again, from chapters 1 and 2, technology is often conceived of by, I guess, so-called laypersons as applied science. We did learn that you can make an argument that this is not the case, right? Technology is not applied science. Technology could be something else, right? For Heidegger, like, just not to jump ahead too far, but for Heidegger down here at the bottom, Heidegger thought of technology as something that kind of shapes human being, not human beings, being. It kind of, it messes with our Dasein, is what he would tell you. Dasein is a Heideggerian term, which means a their being. It means the human, the being that's in the world, who's existing through time. Anyway, let's not get too far into Heidegger. That's a crazy rabbit hole to go down. Likewise, Ellul, who we'll talk a little bit more about, he understands technology in terms of rules, not tools. Or Mannheim, who says the first kinds of technology are not tools, but organized systems of people. Right? Imagine ancient building efforts like the pyramids of Egypt or the Roman aqueducts, right? What's key is not necessarily the tools, but the way people are organized, right? Let's wait till that prompt goes away. There we go. So this is kind of how I suppose lay people think of it, but recall further that technocrats, advocates of technocracy, are advocating for the rule of reason. Plato argued for the rule of reason, logos. He wants to have his logopolis, his ideal city-state. That's what he presents in the Republic. But we saw that there's an argument to be made that Plato is not a true technocrat, because he wants his philosopher kings and queens to first be tutored in arithmetic and geometry, and then to study philosophy, study dialectics, stuff like that, because it's with philosophy that you can question the fundamental assumptions of math. And that's why Dusek presents Plato as not a technocrat, because yes, philosophers are experts in the use of reason, but this is not like scientific or technical. Things change when you get to Bacon, right? Who wanted actual scientists, or natural philosophers, if they would have been called at the time, to play the role of advisor. Now, these same philosophers, a lot of technical thinkers, are actually skeptical, especially in the analytic tradition. So we're talking folks, like the Vienna Circle, or Karl Popper. Popper was kind of Vienna Circle adjacent, right? If you remember. But they are skeptical of the essentialism of figures like Heidegger and Ellul. What I'm calling essentialism here, any form of essentialism, what essentialism means is that you are saying that something has an essential nature, right? So you could be an essentialist about the human being. And you might say, if you were such an essentialist, you might say, what makes a human is some essential characteristic that we have that other things don't have, like language or reason. Or maybe if you're more of a religious figure or a religious person, you might say the soul, right? So essentialism, that's essentialism about the human being. Essentialism about technology says that there is some essential defining characteristic that makes a hammer, an airplane, a space shuttle, a computer technology, but makes other things like trees and I don't know, I'm looking around for random things that aren't technology, and I'm having trouble finding any. How about this plant? This is not technology. But is this technology? Is the pot technology? I don't know. You see what I mean? If we had an essential definition of technology, we could easily say what is and isn't technology if we all agreed on it, right? But analytic philosophers are skeptical of this. They're skeptical that we can do. Jonah says the pot is technology. I would say maybe. It's certainly some kind of craft. It's techne in the ancient Greek sense. Oh, here I'm about to start sounding like Heidegger. Oh, that's not good. Heidegger, by the way, even though he was an essentialist about technology, Heidegger did draw a distinction between techne, which would be something like a flower pot or a coffee cup, and modern technology. The reasons he does that are like way too convoluted to try to explain now. But if you want to know more, you should read The Question Concerning Technology. What you need to always bear in mind, though, when you're reading Heidegger is that the guy was a literal Nazi. So, for my part, sometimes I'm reading him and I'm reading what he says about technology, and I'm thinking to myself, how the hell could you have not have seen how all of this was a problem for human beings in the Third Reich, for all of the people that were murdered by the Nazi regime. The scale of that genocide was possible only because of technology, right? Like, I mean, so yeah, read Heidegger, but you might want to have a shower afterwards. I don't know. I mean, some of his thoughts are cool, but some of his actions in the world are not good. So that's all I'll say about that. As Jonah says, he is weird. Yes. Some of that is the language, though, right? German's an interesting language grammatically, and Heidegger is also an idiosyncratic writer. You kind of have to learn to speak Heideggerian to understand him. So anyway, Heidegger he's an essentialist. He says modern technology, anyway, is a way of being. It actually changes the world and us such that our Dasein, as my supervisor, my grad supervisor, Dave Matheson, put it in conversation once when we were chit-chatting, that your Dasein shrinks. The possibilities for your being become limited because of technology. And yeah, I do think there is something to that. Ellul, as you'll remember, thinks of technology as characterized by rules, not tools, right? So let's go on to the next slide. Maybe we can, no, too far. Maybe we can find some common ground. Wouldn't that be weird if we found some common ground between American philosophers of technology who are influenced by the continental tradition, right? Now, thinkers like Ide, Feinberg, and Donna Haraway, who I hope we get a chance to talk about, because she's got a type of feminism that she calls cyborg feminism. And my jam is robots. Haraway talks about cyborgs in more of a figurative sense in discussions to do with feminism. But still, I think that's really cool. I like robots. I like real robots. I like robots used as rhetorical devices. Why not? So that'd be cool. Hopefully, we can read some Donna Haraway. If you believe what your edgy classmates are telling you, there's a divide between the continental and analytic tradition, and the analytic tradition is reasonable and awesome and great, and the continental tradition is a bunch of baloney. But as we've discussed before, it's way more nuanced than that. The analytic tradition, in many ways, was kind of a failure, right? The Vienna Circle was wrong about being able to make everything scientific, and they were wrong about verificationism. That's the wrong way to be scientific anyway. Russell had also in the analytic tradition had tried to show that mathematics was grounded in logic. kind of failed to do that. I mean, it all in the analytic tradition, I think a lot of the excesses of the analytic tradition and you know, a lot of the stuff that they had thrown out, a lot of the babies that had been thrown out with the bathwater, kind of came to light because of Wittgenstein, right, who was Russell's protege. Yeah, Jonah, I like the way you put that. Oh, and Max is a Max Weber fan. That's good. Well, we're going to talk about Weber in a minute, but yeah, born and died by Wittgenstein, and the continental tradition is base and cool. I think that about sums it up. Oh, spirit of capitalism. You know, I have to admit, I don't know a whole lot about Weber. So if at any point, Max, you want to jump in and tell us something awesome about Weber, you know, as we proceed, that would be cool. But, you know, back to the disagreement between the analytic and the continental tradition. I mean, it's way more nuanced. And look, nowadays we've kind of really got a kind of, I don't know, it seems to me we've almost kind of got a hybrid situation going on where a lot of philosophers who maybe were educated in the analytic tradition are talking about things that the continental tradition were interested in, like meaning in life, technology, all this stuff, right? And this book does a very good job of presenting both traditions. So we have one foot in each camp here. And it's really interesting because these thinkers, Edith, Feinberg, I'm not sure if I spelled that right, and Haraway, agree with the analytic people that technology does not have an essential nature, right? But there are some thinkers who think that, you know, we can characterize technology essentially. Now let's get to Max Weber. Well, Max Weber was a 20th century, early 20th century thinker, and he was a sociologist, not the founder. Remember, the founder was Comte. But Weber was an important sociologist. He talked a lot about technology and also politics. You hear a lot of discussion today about police violence, for example, and whether it's justified or not, and who is it justified against, right? There is, I'll say right away, there is a demonstrable disproportionate level of violence on the part of police in North America, not just in the United States, but in Canada. A disproportionate level of violence deployed against, you know, white protesters versus people of color and Indigenous people. You can see this right now in Ottawa, okay? The last time something was blocked off, the intersection at Elgin and somewhere, it's not far from where I live, that was blocked off for a day by protesters. It was you know, some First Nations protesters, some Solidarity protesters, and they were removed quite quickly, arrested and charged. I don't think the charges stuck. I think the charges did end up being dropped, but I mean, come on. As Stefan says, one group gets treated with kitty gloves, and that's the occupants. I will not call them protesters. At this point, they're occupants. And I'd say, yeah, it's quite clear that they're being treated with the kitty gloves. Now, what's all this talk about violence? Why is the state using violence? Well, according to Weber, the state is the entity that has a monopoly on the legitimate use of organized violence. So, you know, just keep that in mind when you watch protests unfold and you watch the state using violence. It can use it on its own citizens, say protesters, and of course it can use it against other non-state actors. So the first example is what police forces do, and then the next is military forces, obviously. So that's a Weberian understanding, right? So it's interesting to see where these ideas come from, and maybe you've gotten into debates with people about protests, you know, like whether the police response to a particular protest is justified or not. Max, go ahead.
Hey,
Hey,
just like a quick thing on Weber with like the monopoly of violence and like the state being the ones responsible for that. That's like actually very ingrained in like the idea of governance, not only through Weber, but just in the German tradition, even linguistically. For
oh,
example, the word for violence is Gewalt, but that also means force. And then the word for it also means governance. Like the word for violence is the same word for governance.
oh,
And then the
wow.
word and yeah, and the word for authority is Amtsgewalt, which is just organized violence, organized force. So it's like literally the same thing. Like, well, it's not always the same thing, but Amtsgewalt is like a very clear example of like governance is like the assemblance of force.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool. German, one heck of a language, huh? Um, but yeah, that's really interesting. That's insightful. And I would add to that that perhaps it's not just limited to the German speaking world. And I'm thinking here of Hobbes, right? Hobbes, who says, look, we've got a state of nature and nobody wants to live in the state of nature, right? Life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. I can kill you and take all your stuff, right? Who's going to stop me? And you could kill me and take all my stuff. I don't want that. So we'll surrender some of our rights to the state, which is headed by a sovereign. And the state is a giant artificial person. And the state imposes, kind of order and lawfulness through the social contract. But if the contract is broken, what do you do with people that break the contract? Well, you need to kill them. And not only that, but you need to kill them publicly, right? In violent ways. You need to do a little bit of state terrorism, is what we would call it now, like the Romans, right? Who else? Oh, Machiavelli, right? Oh, thanks for the link, Max. Oh, Staatsgewalt. Oh, yeah. I can see it when I read it. State violence. Or like, yeah. That's, man, German. The German language. It's so great. Yeah, or even Machiavelli, right? What did Machiavelli say? It is better to be feared than to be loved. You know. So that is the sort of Weberian understanding of the state, and it is very ingrained in the German language, but also I think ingrained in our own understanding of our own systems of government, such that it's only recently that we've begun to question whether this is, I mean, question in the public discussion. I know there have been people advocating for reforming or defunding the police for a long time, but it's only now part of the zeitgeist, right? That's how ingrained these ideas are. So it's good to know where they come from. So Weber also understands the rise of modern Western society as the rise of rationality, and he calls this rationalization, right? What he means by that is the systemization and organization by means of rational principles. And he didn't just limit this to government, excuse me, to governments, to studying bureaucracies, whether in government or business, but he also applied it to religion and music as well. He even did a study of rationalization on the construction of the piano, which sounds interesting. I should read that at some point. Back to Ellul's technique, it shares a bit of parallels with Weber's rationalization, even though Ellul, also a 20th century figure, he does not mention Weber. I'm not sure if he wasn't aware of him or what, but in any case, for all of the parallels that are there, Jacques Ellul doesn't draw any attention to Weber's work. So Ellul thinks of technique. Technology is characterized by technique, and technique is like rules. And the application of these rules to every aspect of society or life is what is called the technical phenomenon. So it's rules, not tools, right? So if you're thinking of technology and and stuff along those lines. You might be thinking of technology as a bit like as we said earlier, a computer program or a cookbook. These would be technology. Apps. Think of how many people have apps for all kinds of things, right? People have apps for exercising, for dieting, cooking, for studying. We have apps for everything, you know? Like I like to play chess on my chess.com app, right? Let's see if I have any notifications. I don't think I do. Oh, I have a couple. Oh, it's just telling me to make some moves. But earlier, it had a notification that said, don't forget to take your chess lesson this week, right? So that's kind of like technique, right? All of these are characterized by rules. This is either the app itself is rules. It's a computer program. It's made of a bunch of algorithms, or you're treating what it tells you to do as a sort of rule for yourself. You know, like I get a notification, don't forget your chess lesson. And so I do my chess lesson. Or like an app like Duolingo. Don't forget your French lesson, right? Or whatever language you're learning. There's more stuff like this now than there has been before. And I think that society is continuing to go that way. We're continuing to, you know, there's an app for everything. We're monetizing this and making apps for that. So we are living in the midst of the technical phenomenon, right, that Elul was talking about. It seems to me anyway. Then again, some of those apps don't work, right? Duolingo tells me it's time for my Klingon lesson, and I haven't been studying. Not very good. I bring dishonor to my house. All right, so let's continue on page 54. In the late 20th century, Dusek says, theories of technocracy and post-industrial society, the application of scientific rationality to various areas of social prediction and planning was seen as an admirable culmination of the rise of reason. The application of such techniques as operations analysis, cost-benefit and risk-benefit analysis, rational choice theory, and the general application of economic models to apparently non-economic aspects of society, such as politics and even mate choice, is seen as a positive step. Applied social science becomes social engineering of a sort far more complex and sophisticated than the progressive movement forerunners of the technocracy movement envisioned. These are the folks we talked about at the end of the last chapter, by the way. You know, the Myrdals and Thorstein Veblen and those guys. So, in contrast to the technocrats and technological optimists, Dusek writes, those who have been pessimistic about the dominance of technology in our society have often contrasted a higher or genuine rationality with technological rationality or instrumental rationality. So here's where we can get a little discussion going, probably. I mean, there are different kinds of reason. That's what's being said here. We've got instrumental rationality, which is technological rationality, but it needs to be guided by something higher, right? Like Plato said, Plato's philosopher kings had to start with mathematics, geometry, all of that fun stuff. But then they had to learn philosophy and dialectic. Why? Well, they had to learn it so that they could question the fundamental assumptions of mathematical reasoning. You know, we can reason about triangles. We can do geometry. What is the area of this figure? What's the area of this figure? How many of these figures will fit in this figure? Right? We can do that. But what about the fundamental assumptions? What are triangles? Right? What is area? You know, what is a straight line? Well, you know, that's why Plato does philosophy. And of course, the answer is that there's forms for everything if you're Plato, right? So Plato's kind of like that, but really in the modern tradition, this view has its roots in Kant and Hegel. You know, Kant wrote 3 critiques about different kinds of reason. He's got the critique of pure reason, of practical reason, and of judgment. And Hegel saw reason as this kind of world spirit, you know, a Weltgeist that's like unfolding in the world. and making history happen, right? So, there are the technocrats and the technological optimists say that, well, the kind of rationality that guides technology is instrumental rationality, and it needs to be guided by something higher. And the contrast between these two kinds of reason has been taken up in like critical theory, for example. Critical theory is an area in the continental tradition where on critical theory, which I believe comes out of the Frankfurt School, critical theory is all about identifying and critiquing power structures, right? Particularly, I think, unjust ones. So what you do is you try to identify these power structures and you try and deconstruct them, right? So there's a lot of, for example, a lot of feminism comes out of critical theory, right? A lot of 20th century feminists are all about identifying and deconstructing power structures that are unjust and which are maybe based themselves on socially constructed notions of gender, right? So that's an example of critical theory. So what about reason itself? Let's talk more about reason. And this is a funny chapter because there's only like one chapter heading and it's like 2/3 of the way through the chapter. It's like, I don't know, I would have organized this a little better, but whatever. So we've already learned that there's one paradigmatic example of reason, and that is mathematics. And that's been the case since ancient Greece, right? Always remember, on the doors above Plato's Academy, it was written, not one person untutored in geometry. You had to study geometry before you could study philosophy for Plato. What does Dusek say about mathematics? Well, mathematics is generally considered to have the features of universality, necessity, rigor, and certainty. Mathematics has universality with respect to individuals as well as cultures. Mathematical results are such that anyone correctly following the calculation techniques will get the same result. There is no subjective individual variation in correct answers to a well-set problem. Likewise, there is no cultural variation in the results of a proof or a problem, even if there is cultural variation in the notation or symbols. This is true. Dusek uses the example of the Pythagorean theorem, right? The square of the hypotenuse is equal to the square of the sum of the remaining sides, right? That's a right triangle. Doesn't work for other triangles, but everybody learns Pythagoras' theorem in elementary school. And we say, oh yeah, we attribute it to Pythagoras, but it was independently discovered in other cultures too, particularly in India and in ancient India and ancient China. Both very advanced, very reasonable cultures themselves. I mean, come on, in ancient India, they invented the number 0. I mean, come on, we wouldn't have the number 0 without ancient Indian mathematics. So, there you go. And they all had different ways of writing things down, obviously. Greeks had their own number system. The Chinese cultures had their own number system. The Indian number system actually gradually spread west to Persia and the Arabic world. And from there to the east, or they're further west. We use that system to this day. We call them Arabic numbers, but actually their origins go further back to India. So cool, good to know. Different symbols, doesn't matter. You can still get the same results. I mean, think of it this way. When we try to contact, if we're going to send a message to alien life, right? What do we do? Oh, Stefan, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, but that'll come back. Well, actually, maybe what I was about to say will kind of solve this problem. If this is a worry, like if mathematics is the paradigmatic example of reason because mathematics works the way it does, since it relies on axioms that govern the entire system, sure, but math could also be thought of as like a language of nature, right? And that's why I ask, if we want to send a message to aliens. Let's say there's some aliens out there. We want to beam them a message. We want to let them know we're here. What do? We use a radio telescope. We got to send them a message. What do we send them? Anyone want to take a guess? Right, but remember, so right, we can't send a message in English or whatever language. So how can we communicate? But we can communicate. We could let them know we're here. How would we do that? We need to use the language of nature. What's the language of nature? Hydrogen? Well, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean, Emily. Vibrations. Waves. All right, I'll tell you. You do it with math, right? Say I want to let some aliens know I'm here, or maybe aliens want to let us know that they're out there. You send some numbers, but you need to send something that is definitely artificial. Yes, Zach, that's another good point. And I'll come back to the Voyager probe in a moment. Let's say you want to let aliens know we're here. You got to send a signal, and you got to make sure that it cannot be natural. It's got to be absolutely clear that it is an artificial signal. There's one surefire way to do that, and that is prime numbers. No natural phenomenon produces sequences of prime numbers. So you could beam prime numbers, the number 2, the number 3, the number 5, the number 7, the number 13. Wait, no, 11. I forgot 11. 11's my favorite prime. How can I forget that? Oh, yeah, okay. Yes, it's true. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. Yeah, Carl Sagan would talk about this all the time. Likewise with the prime number example that I just used. Maybe you could communicate, you could come up with some kind of way of representing a hydrogen molecule with numbers, and you could communicate the the periodic table of elements this way. Yeah, hydrogen is probably what's used as hydrogen, as you said earlier, the constant on the Voyager probe. The Voyager has that golden record with instructions on how to use it in case any aliens find it. So yeah, what you would do is you would have to sort of talk in math. You would have to say, like, here's our system of math, and the aliens would figure that out, and that's how we'd communicate with them. Pretty cool. So math is truly universal if you think about it that way. Furthermore, let's get rid of this. Furthermore, the logic of mathematical proof has a compelling necessity. If one follows the proof step by step, one is inexorably led to the conclusion. The necessary conclusions have certainty. They cannot reasonably be doubted. So mathematics is universal, necessary, rigorous, and certain. Whoops. This is nicely exemplified by this idea of the algorithm, which you've probably heard of, right? You've heard of algorithms. Maybe you've heard of what's Tess say? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Oh, so that makes sense. Now I understand. Yeah. Used as a constant because it's the most fundamental atom, right? It's the simplest atom, right? So yeah, that's good. See, and so yeah, math, the language of nature, right? Okay, the algorithm. You guys have heard of algorithms, right? Search algorithms, shopping algorithms, all kinds of algorithms. Traveling salesman problem. Well, the traveling sales problem, yeah, that's one of those problems where it's hard to solve algorithmically. Yeah, it's difficult. The reason why the traveling salesman problem is difficult is because the problem space is so huge, right? You know, if I have 25 cities and I have to find the most efficient route between all of them, that's the traveling salesman problem, right? You've got a number of cities and the traveling salesman has to travel to all of them, but he has to work out the best route, the most efficient route. If I have, say, 25 cities, it's going to take me longer than the age of the universe to do that calculation, right? It's computationally intractable. We can't solve it, at least now. It's very difficult to solve, but it's not because it can't in principle be solved. It's more of a problem of computational resources. Quantum computing, maybe. You know the coolest approach I've seen? Ants. That's right, ants. What people will do, yeah, Zach, you've heard of this one, eh? I can't remember the name of the authors, but they created these virtual ants that crawl around on the routes between the cities. Now, real ants leave pheromone trails, and they have this emergent behavior where, ants are wandering randomly, leaving pheromone trails, and then one ant finds some food. So that ant, she brings it back to the hive or nest or whatever, leaves another pheromone trail because she follows her own trail back. Now that trail is twice as strong. And the thing about ants is they're attracted to stronger pheromone trails. So now we've got one pheromone trail that's twice as strong. So more ants start following it, making it stronger, getting the food. And before you know it, from the chaos of ants wandering randomly, we have ants marching in a line. So people made some virtual ants and had them come up with very efficient solutions to traveling salesman problems, which is really cool. But it's not algorithmic, right? Not really. It's emergent. So ants are great. But the notion of an algorithm is borrowed from mathematics, borrowed from ancient mathematics, actually. There was a figure called al-Khwarizmi, an ancient Arabic mathematician, scientist, philosopher, and it is his namesake. Yeah, ant colony optimization. That's the one. Thanks. Yeah, everybody should take a look at this if you're interested in technology, computer science. This is a really cool paper, so do check it out. So the notion of the algorithm is borrowed from ancient mathematics by oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks, Zach. Yeah, everybody should check this out. It's pretty neat. Yeah, so algorithm borrowed from al-Khwarizmi way back in the day, working in Baghdad at the House of Wisdom. And it's a step-by-step procedure. Alan Turing, the 20th century computer scientist, borrowed this and applied it to computer science. He understood an algorithm as a mechanized procedure that'll always lead you to the correct result, right? As long as your problem is computable. Some things are not computable, right? If you're familiar with Gödel's theorem, for example, there are some statements you can make within a system that you will never be able to prove just by virtue of the way the system is, right? And similarly, there are going to be something that is not computable. If a problem cannot be solved algorithmically, we say it's not computable. So not everything is computable, but whatever is computable, we can solve those problems with algorithms. And this is the thing that gave us modern computers. This is the modern computer was not invented by Turing. The digital computer was not invented by Turing. The first digital computer was actually invented by Charles Babbage in the 19th century. And some of the first programs written for it were written by Lady Ada Lovelace. So there you go. The first computer programmer was a woman. Pretty cool stuff. Now, Turing didn't invent this stuff, the computer, but he did formalize it. He explained the causal roles of all the parts of a computer, everything a computer needs to have to be a computer, right? And one of the things computers do is they solve problems step by step, algorithmically, and then they deliver their result. So the notion of the algorithm is another sort of mechanistic kind of reason that I expect we'll all be familiar with. But other than numbers that aren't computable or problems that are not computable, math is still pretty precise even when it seems imprecise. For example, there's math that deals with statistics or probabilities, right? Like the weather, weather reports are based on probabilistic modeling, right? And they're not always right, but the predictions are nonetheless precise. I can make a weather report. Maybe I'll say tomorrow it's going to be +1. I might be wrong, but my prediction is still pretty precise. My weather prediction is never, there's going to be a high somewhere between +1 and +5. I don't know. And then a low overnight of anywhere from -5 to -10. I don't know. We can't figure it out. That's not what your weather reports are like. You do get a precise high and low. Likewise, with statistics, when we're talking about odds, the odds of something happening, we still get precise predictions. We get precise distributions. Math is precise even when it's dealing with things that are perhaps not all that precise. Yeah, exactly. Precise does not equal accurate, So we can get things wrong, but we can get things wrong very precisely. Always remember that. So a lot of modern philosophers, and I'm talking modern as in the modern period, after the Enlightenment, kind of through the scientific revolution up until the well, I guess up until now, which would be post-modernity. So we have philosophers like the rationalist philosophers who argued that reason must mirror mathematics. Of course, again, Plato, we've seen this in Plato, and Plato is kind of like a proto-rationalist. A lot of the things that he says, truth is a result of reason, of the intellect, not the senses. Certain kinds of knowledge are innate. These are core tenets of rationalism, and the math too. Math is a paradigmatic example of reason. These are all core tenets of rationalism, and it's no surprise. Plato was trained in the Pythagorean tradition. He knew his geometry and his arithmetic. The rationalist philosophers of the modern period, likewise, were mathematically literate. I mean, René Descartes is the father of rationality in the modern tradition. Descartes was also a mathematician who made very important contributions to the scientific revolution. He was the inventor of analytic geometry. You've probably heard terms like Cartesian plane, where you have remember in high school, maybe you had a graphing calculator or some graphing paper, and you had a Cartesian plane with an X and a Y axis, right? And remember Y equals mx plus b. Oh my good, it's all coming back to me. This is Descartes, right? This is Descartes. Leibniz, another rationalist thinker. He was into monads. He had this weird metaphysics that was all about monads. Monads are like kind of hard to explain. I kind of think of them as like elementary particles, but not like particles, more like elementary bits of, maybe like if elementary particles were mind. It's weird. The monadology is weird. But anyway, Leibniz is a rationalist thinker. He's also the co-inventor of calculus along with Isaac Newton. They both independently invented differential and integral calculus. The interesting thing is today we still use Leibniz's system of notation, not Newton's, even though Newton is given the credit. You know, sometimes Leibniz is left out and the credit goes specifically to Newton. So Leibniz, also pretty good math person. Baruch Spinoza, he supported himself as a lens grinder. He wasn't a fancy professor, and this may be because he was excommunicated. You know, his family, originally from Spain, they had to leave. Spinoza and his family were Jewish, and they had to leave Spain because of persecution. And they went to the Netherlands, where there was much more freedom of thought, because I believe at that time the Netherlands had recently become independent from Spain. So an interesting historical fact there. But Spinoza, because of his radical ideas, he got himself excommunicated from the Jewish community there as well. The reason is that Spinoza was a pantheist, right? Spinoza says God is everything. You know, God is like the ultimate substance. There's just one substance, but it has different attributes, extension, thought, things like that. And all of us are modes of those things, right? Little extensions. I'm a little bit of extension and thought. But if God is everything, that means I'm God, and that's heresy. So he got kicked out of the Jewish community, and he would just, you know, he worked as a lens grinder, just grinding his lenses, thinking about philosophy. He probably died as a result of inhaling the very fine dust into his lungs. What a way to go. That sucks. But he was an excellent philosopher. If you read his work, it's written like a mathematical treatise, right? It is written with axioms, postulates. You know, it's very mathematical. It kind of reads like Wittgenstein, right? If you've read the Tractatus, it's a lot like Spinoza's work. Albert Einstein was also influenced by Spinoza and Kant. That's just an interesting little tidbit. Do what you want with that. Okay, 12:35. Doing okay for time. Even some empiricists, remember, there used to be a divide between rationalism and empiricism. So even empiricist thinkers, even empiricist thinkers argued that reasoning should mirror mathematics. So John Locke was an empiricist. He thought that knowledge comes from the senses, not the intellect, primarily, and that there was not any innate knowledge. You know, Descartes, Plato, they all believe in some kind of innate knowledge. John Locke did not. John Locke says the mind is a blank slate at birth. I forgot about that quote, Jonah. You're either a Spinozist or not a philosopher at all. That's great. Yeah, you know what? Spinoza's a funny dude. When you read him, it can be kind of hard to understand, but it's rewarding. I would read Spinoza. Spinoza, if you're going to go back and read an old philosopher, Spinoza is fun. You know what? I miss teaching Spinoza. I'm just going to come out and say it. I miss it. I've been teaching too much Descartes these days. I got to teach them Spinoza. So anyway, John Locke, you know, he's an empiricist, so he differs from the rationalist tradition. Rationalism says there is innate knowledge and that truth or knowledge comes from the intellect. Empiricism says knowledge comes from the senses and that the mind is a blank slate at birth, which Locke actually gets from Aristotle. Locke was not the first person to claim this. It was actually Aristotle all the way back in ancient Greece. Now, that's interesting. I mentioned that because while Plato was like an early rationalist, Aristotle, once he came into his own, it's kind of like an early empiricist in many important ways. So that's cool. But what does Dusek say about Locke? He says, John Locke claimed that natural philosophy, physics, couldn't be a science because we don't know the essences of the submicroscopic construction of bodies, while ethics might be a science because it is based on logical derivations from definitions, right? So Locke is understanding science like math or like philosophy, that, you know, deducing things from assumptions, right? Deductive reasoning, not induction, which is how Bacon understood science. Locke's understanding of science is therefore the reverse of what the positivists would say. They would say, well, of course, physics is a science. John Locke, what are you talking about? Physics is a science because we can talk about the subject matter of physics, and we can check whether the statements we're making are true, right? Like electrons are negatively charged, right? That's a statement that I can go and verify, right? The atomic weight of oxygen is greater than that of hydrogen. I can check that. I can go see if that's true. So that's science. But ethics, come on, the positivists are going to say, what are you talking about? Ethics isn't a science. It's just what you feel. It's your feelings. You can't like point to any outside verification that what you feel is correct. You know, it's also why they dispensed with metaphysics. So even if you're not a rationalist, this idea is you know, rationalism kind of snuck in there in Locke's understanding of science. And the mathematical ideal of reasoning has even led to what Dusek calls computational understandings of ethics, like, for example, Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism. So utilitarianism, I'm sure everyone's heard of utilitarianism, right? Please, Bentham, let me in your school. Yeah, a lot of people are familiar with utilitarianism, which is kind of, I mean, utilitarianism now it's understood as a kind of, it's a sub variety of consequentialism, where actions are right or wrong by virtue of their consequences. Now, Bentham's particular kind of consequentialism, utilitarianism, I believe is best understood as a kind of hedonistic act consequentialism. Act means it's actions. Actions will produce good or bad outcomes, and hedonistic because the way that we measure what is good and bad is by units of pleasure and pain. You know, hedonism comes from hedone, which means pleasure in ancient Greek. So, oh, act versus rule. Yeah, good point, Max. Some utilitarians or some consequentialists are rule consequentialists. So for them, the emphasis is on rules that would increase utility rather than actions. So they try to formulate rules that increase utility, that is, increase pleasure, decrease pain, and we follow those rules rather than evaluating acts that we're about to make or have made. So that, thank you. Yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind. I believe Bentham is more of an act utilitarianism, but it's been so long since I read any of this that, you know, let's just say he's a utilitarian. And the idea is of utilitarianism is quite computational. Whether we're talking about acts or rules, we're talking about net pleasures, and we subtract from the net pleasures the net pain or gross pains or whatever, right? The total pains. As Julien says, the less people suffer, the better the decision. If there is at least one person who suffers less by choosing option A over option B, then option A is the better option. The hedonism element, Max says, is totally seen in defining utility as pleasure. Yeah. And sometimes instead of pleasure, we talk about happiness. I think that hedonism in ethics is actually quite helpful. If you want to, yeah, like Max, you say happiness is more used, but pleasure, yeah, I agree exactly with what you say there. Happiness is what we use. We say happiness, what we mean is pleasure. And I think that if you want to say anything true, if you want to ground anything in truth in ethics, if you want to avoid being like an error theorist or something, you've really got to be a hedonist, right? I think I might be a bit of an ethical hedonist. What is intrinsically good? Well, it's what promotes pleasure and happiness and well-being. But well-being, good. Am I begging the question there? I might be. I'm going to have to think about this more. Max, go ahead.
I think hedonism has like a very certain Western tradition of individualism, despite it being about groups, because it is like true where you pick the larger group and that group succeeds, but that group's happiness is like dependent on their own like individual idea of what happiness is. And that's not me critiquing it yet. That's just me saying that like the individual happiness is like, I think pleasure is like a way more accurate term, because pleasure is derived from like personal satisfaction and like understanding of actions. But then you bring happiness into the equation. That's like a bit, I think it's a bit too specific. Like, and also like people feel, I don't know, but also like the emphasis on happiness is something that I don't know, personally, I don't really care about. Like, I think it's better for society if we stop thinking about happiness as utility and think more of utility as like achieving basic needs, like at the Maslow's hierarchy. Like, sure, I think happiness stems from, you know, basic income maybe, or it's like just having like food.
Yeah, so, and I think that's why, at the risk of begging the question, I said well-being.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah,
like rural utilitarianism, I think, is what I go more towards.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, and utilitarianism isn't perfect, right? I mean, if you want to, let's do a thought experiment.
Let's talk about minorities. Let's just discrimination.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah,
utilitarianism.
Exactly, right? On utilitarianism, you know, the ends justify the means, right? So I can justify some. I can justify some pretty nasty means if I have the right end. Opposite of deontology, exactly. And deontology is like a Kantian thing. Thought experiment time. Let's do the crying baby, okay? This is my favorite. Well, it's not my favorite, but it's pretty metal. So, okay. Let's use our imaginations, everyone. Thought experiments are a tool we use in philosophy. And why we use them is not to, you know, come up with a definitive answer, but to get our intuitions pumping, to test our concepts, our beliefs, to sort of see what we really believe, or to see how certain beliefs work, right? So let's do the crying baby, and let's compare deontology with utilitarianism, just for funsies. So it's wartime. Let's say it's World War II. All right. The Nazis are coming and you're hiding. They're in your village. They're in your town and they are being brutal. You know, they're rounding up people. They're rounding up members of the resistance. They're rounding up Jews. They're rounding up Roma people. They're rounding up the political dissidents. When you're trying to escape, so you're there with a group of people and you're hiding somewhere, and the soldiers don't seem to notice you, but you got a baby. One of your folks there, they have a baby with them. So the Nazis are outside with their flashlights. They're looking around. It's very tense. Baby starts to cry. Now, what do? You have two options, and this is how thought experiments work. You only have two options. Max knows what I'm going to say. Maybe here's your options. You do kill the baby. That's right. Do you kill the baby? If you kill the baby, the soldiers don't find you. If you do not kill the baby, the soldiers find you and kill you, the baby, and everyone else that you're with. What do you do? Abby says, bye-bye, baby. No, Dominic, I know you want to just silence the baby. But the conditions of the thought experiment are such that you cannot silence the baby other than Max, you can silence the baby. That's right. And if you're bad at killing, silencing everyone, the baby dies either way, right? There was one up here. Tess, you had a thought. Fulfilling your most basic needs is something that leads to happiness. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I do see what you're saying there, Tess. I don't think that you and Max disagree. It doesn't seem to me that you disagree that much here. It's just that, yeah. I think you guys agree. I think that what Max was saying, and stop me if I'm putting words in your mouth, that by emphasizing rules versus acts, if we're going to be consequentialists, what we do is make society such that, people can pursue happiness, right? But we're not using happiness as the benchmark of success, right? Yeah. Okay, good. So I didn't misrepresent you. I'm glad, Max. So to get back to killing crying babies, the deontologist would say, well, you can't kill. Killing is wrong. Imagine if Kant was there with the baby. He might say, well, I can't kill this baby because I cannot will that killing babies should become a universal law, right? We apply the categorical imperative and we see well, killing is wrong. We have a duty to preserve life. We should not kill them. So you don't kill the baby. You've done the right thing. Congratulations, you're dead. And you've also pretty much killed the baby anyway, because they're going to come and kill the baby. But if you do the utilitarian approach, just kill the baby. Baby's dead, but the rest of the people are alive. So more utility, right? But then there are extreme examples, extreme examples that definitely violate some of the other things about utilitarianism that thinkers like Locke and Bentham have talked about. There's the surgery one, right? If a guy is in a car accident and he goes to the emergency room and he's going to die, the doctor should take his organs because he can save 5 other people with his organs, right? This guy's going to die. Nobody would balk at that. This guy, he's just been in an accident. He's going to die, but his organs are still good. And I can take 1 organ. I can take 5 of these organs and I can give 1 to each of these other patients and I can save them. That seems like the right thing to do, right? That's why we have organ donor cards, right? What if a guy just comes into the hospital and he's not going to die, but he comes in and, maybe he's like, doctor, I stubbed my toe. Oh, come on into my room here, patient. And then I kill him and give his organs to the 5 dying people. I mean, I would be increasing utility, wouldn't I? But I would also be violating this healthy person's autonomy, which, even on utilitarianism, usually people think of preserving autonomy as a deontology thing, but no. On utilitarianism, we are also not supposed to mess with people's autonomy. So if a random guy shows up to the doctor's office, I can't kill him and harvest his organs just because I could save 5 other people, right? But if he were dying and consented to it, then it would probably be okay, right? Where are we? 12:51 already. I didn't think that I was going to get. I didn't think I was going to have enough slides. And look, we've got too many slides. That's okay though, because these discussions that we get into are a lot of fun. We could do one more slide, just by way of introducing scientific rationality. So, in the 20th century, we've got this notion that emerges called scientific rationality. What does Dusek say here? He says, rational choice theorists in the 20th century political science have modeled political and military strategies on an economic model of costs and benefits. Oh, this is actually quite similar to utilitarianism. Risk-benefit analysts evaluate the worthwhileness of technological projects by adding benefits and subtracting risks in a manner similar to Bentham's utilitarianism. And there are some interesting examples of this in the text, which I think I'll raise next time. Liam here says, I think that's more of a matter of those people are already in a position of sickness, and so it is not the responsibility of this person to help with their organs. That's right. I mean, the healthy person, I mean. But I think there is some room for debate if we were dealing with a person who was severely injured or dying. Then again, oh, okay, yeah. Is that Vida? Is that Dr. Vida Panich who teaches that? Yeah. In my way back in my first year in graduate school, I TA'd her bioethics class. I don't think it was that one, but I was her TA way back in the day. It was like my second TA assignment, and I was terrible at it. And but anyway, Dr. Panich is great. She's really good at this stuff. So what else? I was going to say something. Oh yeah, I was going to say that Liam, you make a good point. And just as I was replying to it, I thought of the reports of organ harvesting in Chinese re-education camps. You know what I'm saying? There are reports that, yeah, the Uyghurs, right? The Uyghurs are Muslims who live in northern China, and of course, China, Marxist Leninism, Chinese communism, even though it's kind of state capitalism now, is officially atheist, right? You know, the Communist Party of China has not only persecuted the Uyghur Muslims, but also Falun Gong practitioners, Tibetan Buddhists, right? They're very they're not cool about this stuff. So you have these folks who get sent to these re-education camps where they have to disavow their religion and learn all about communism. There are reports from human rights groups coming out that started a few years ago that people are having their organs taken. I mean, this is a utilitarian question, right? Or rather, this is the worry of utilitarianism not reined in by respect for people's autonomy, right? I mean, the people in these prisons, if you know, in a perfect world, or rather, or ideally, you know, even prisoners have rights. They should have certain rights to like this, what we would call the security of the person in Canada, or to bodily autonomy. You know, if I go to prison in Canada, you know, the government of Canada can't harvest my organs, right? They can tell me when to wake up, when to go to sleep, when to do this, when to do that. But they can't, you know, they can't just harvest my guts, right? Because bodily autonomy and security of the person. So yeah, I guess that's a concern, right? We can have all these interesting thought experiments about crying babies or surgeons, trolley problems. There are all kinds of interesting thought experiments that highlight the differences between utilitarianism, deontology, and other ways of reasoning about right and wrong. If anyone has the chance, by the way, to take moral psychology, do it. Sometimes I teach it. I think someone else is teaching it at the moment, but sometimes I teach it. It's fun. It's all about how we think about morality. But anyway, you know, we can have these fun thought experiments, but we should also remember that there are real world cases of, you know, where all of this this is happening. Oh, cheers, Cameron. Yeah, when was the last time? Oh, that was a few years ago, wasn't it? That was a few years ago. That was a summer class. Yeah, that was my first time teaching it. I think I've taught it once more since then. The lectures are on my YouTube channel, so if anyone's curious, I don't know who's teaching it now at Carleton, but it's a great class. You know, take it with me, take it with someone else. It's really cool. It's really cool stuff. Oh boy, we're out of time. Okay, let's wrap it up there. So, what slide are we on? We are on what slide? Well, whatever. We'll finish these slides. Oh, well, we almost finished. Yeah, we'll finish these slides next week. We'll try to finish the entire chapter next week, actually. And sometime, I mean, let's say Monday at the latest, I'm going to aim to have your feedback for you because, you know, there's a lot of craziness going on. I live downtown, so I'm dealing with this occupation nonsense. And I heard some honking for the first time this morning when I took my dog to the park. So maybe things are ramping up again for the weekend. I don't know. If any of you live in the downtown core, please stay safe. You know, things seem to be pretty chill during the day, but it's at night when things get a little rowdy. People start drinking, they're shooting off fireworks, barbecuing. You know, just take care of yourselves out there, and we'll finish this next week. And yeah, between this grading, other grading, stuff that's going on in town, I will do my best along with Liam to have your feedback to you as soon as we can. Right, freedom, right? I mean, come on, guys. Also, this crowd, oh my God. I went up to Rideau Street. I come from a small northern Ontario town. It's not very diverse. You know, it's not like Ottawa or Toronto, right? But when I was on Rideau Street, I had this weird uncanny valley sensation where I was like, I know I'm in Ottawa, but it looks like I'm in my hometown because the crowd is it's pretty Caucasian, you know? And yeah, Max, like, this is one reason why you know, I'm not going to ask any of my in-person students to traverse this. You know, I'm like that's privilege. I mean, that's privilege. These protesters, look at all this freaking white privilege. It sucks. And you know, I might be able to walk around safely. That's my privilege, but I'm not going to ask somebody who needs to mask up or someone who's visibly a minority or with a disability to subject themselves to this. And yeah, Vicente, you're right. The police are so dropping the ball on this. So yeah, be careful. Be careful, everyone. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. There's one of the leaders. There's ex-RCMP and ex-military. It's nuts. Stay safe, everyone. We should have done what Toronto and Quebec City did. You know, they barricaded things off ahead of time. They said there's certain places you're just not going to go. And they hung around for a bit and they left. Yeah. So yeah, you guys, I want you all to take care of yourselves over the weekend. If you do have to go downtown, or if you run into these occupiers, yeah, they saw how we dropped the ball. That's right, Liam. They saw that we dropped the ball. We frigged up. So guys, take care of yourselves out there. Have a good weekend. Don't get mixed up in any of that nonsense. Stay safe. Don't get sick. I'll see you next week. And I should have some feedback for you. Yes, that's a great idea, Vicente. If anybody needs anything, let's be there for one another. Let's be there for one another. And we can communicate on the Discord server for that, if anyone needs a hand. Anything is fair game, really, Julien. 3 and 4, yeah. Or if you want to relate something from chapters 1 and 2 to something in 3 and 4, that's fine too. Really anything in lecture is, or the book is fair game. All right, I better get out of here. I've got to clean, I got to do some cleaning and some marking. So cheers, everyone. Take care, stay safe, and I will see you all next week. And we'll talk more about rationality and reason and instrumental rationality. Okay, bye for now.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Stay safe. End.